said I'm getting so old, but it's worth it, I suppose, just to know what I know. Oh yes, I see what she means, but now just what is it she's done? Now she's losing her mind. She thinks she's guilty at heart.
Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone so you can stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And about 7.5 years into an iconic adventure, after 3,500 interviews, I've dedicated my show not just to the luminary cats in music, but also to the unsung heroes, the accompanists, and the rhythm sections that really helped create new musical vocabulary all over the country and the world. And I get a chance today to go a little bit deeper into the southeastern portion of the United States with a legendary drummer who was holding down sessions at Capricorn Records with guys I've interviewed like Paul Hornsby and Tommy Talton, and was also the decorated drummer for the rhythm section, the band known as Cowboy. Billy Stewart, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi, Jake.
How you doing, man?
Good. I'm good. Good to talk to you.
You too, man. You know, I always like to talk to the cats about this, but I just wanted you to talk about your concept as a drummer as it relates to the downbeat. When you get into a, not so much in the studio, but when you get into an improvisational jam and everybody in the band kind of loses where the one is, and then everybody's able to come back in on the one, that cathartic feeling of coming back in on the one. So I wanted the Billy Stewart definition of the idea that any note can be the one.
Well, it's sort of like when you try to play jazz, you hear these guys do these long solos, and say a drum solo, and all of a sudden the whole band comes back in together. And it's sort of where, I guess from really experience, that you aren't sitting there going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, you just feel it. And I mean, you're semi-consciously counting, but not exactly.
Right.
So that's part of it. You kind of got to know where you are in the measures, musical measures, and I think a lot of that comes from experience. But in my case, I think one of the things I had going for me was having a pretty good ear, and I keep time pretty good. And so that's really what's happened with me. And I have found that playing too much on top of the beat is not really a good thing. So,
well, I mean, what is when you first started out, even prior to your days in the studios, I mean, were you in a band what was the band where your ears grew the most?
Well, when I was going to college over in Alabama, I sort of dropped out, and because I wanted to play.
Yeah, I mean, that was totally reasonable. A lot of cats were doing that, you know? Yeah.
Well, and I wound up in Tuscaloosa with Chuck Lavelle, Paul Hornsby, me.
Oh,
and,
man.
Let's see, Glenn Butts was the guitar player. Charlie Hayward, who's with Charlie Daniels' band. We had that band called South Camp. And that's when I sort of realized that I could do this for a vocation and, throw myself all the way into it. And that was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, before we all wound up in Macon. And that was, 60, 8 and 9 in there. We were kids, you know, but it shaped up to be a good, really good band. Chuck Lavelle was the lead singer, by the way.
Chuck Lavelle was singing lead, and it was called, what was it?
He was the lead singer. The band was named South Camp.
Right.
And we were one of the first hippie bands, you know.
Say that again?
We were one of the first hippie bands.
How did that go? Can you just talk about the regional? I always feel like when you guys were coming up, especially, there was regional radio, there was bleed through channels. You know, I'm 40 years old, so I grew up. I was born in '78, and basically, you know, seeing the consolidation of radio. But, you know, every single pocket of this country at a certain time had its own regional sound. And I was sort of wondering if you could talk a little bit about how, you know, whether it's Alabama, Macon, you know, and those sounds came from, I just interviewed the great Stax drummer Willie Hall, and he talked about, his concept was the East Coast drummers, let's see if I can get this right, they play in front of the beat. The West Coast drummers play right on top of the beat, and the drummers from Florida, Georgia, Texas, they're playing on the back end of the beat. And I wanted to ask you really about the regional sounds, how you would describe the regional sounds of the Southeast in the United States, and also this idea of the laid back, playing behind the beat, if that's where you felt you came in on.
Well, Willie, I think I know who you're talking about. He that was pretty good description of it, as far as the East Coast, West Coast, and the Southeast.
Yeah.
I think the Southeast guys, people down here play behind the beat. That's sort of what people say about my playing, is you know. But I play a lot with click tracks, so I don't guess I'm too far behind the beat. But you take guys like Roger Hawkins, who a friend of mine and greatly influenced me. He's a good example. Al Jackson from Stax.
Oh yeah, well that's who. See, when Willie Hall, when the Bar-Kays and Otis died tragically, Willie was part of the new Bar-Kays. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah, so Al Jackson Jr.
Yeah, so you take, Jake, there's other pockets besides Muscle Shoals in Memphis. That's when I moved to Macon, I moved there to be what I thought was going to be like Stax and Muscle Shoals sound. It was a little different because we were employees, and for instance, if I didn't play drums on a session, then I assisted the engineer. You know, I'd set up the mics and assisted the main engineer and producer. But but getting back to the regions, you take Betty, Betty did Cleanup Woman, Betty Wright, is that her name?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's another pocket of that behind the beat Southern sort of sound as far as studio players. And of course you don't want to leave out New Orleans, the Meters guys, Zig, Modaliste, and those guys.
Oh God, I mean it's ridiculous. But I mean, it was so beautiful that you were, again, you were in one of these hippie bands, but I mean, were you even really conscious of the fact that, what's so amazing about you guys, and it's just so beautiful that you are still around to be able to riff on it, is that it was like, I remember I've done a few interviews with David Garibaldi from Tower of Power, and he,
oh, really? He's great.
Yeah, he's the man. And I got to get your email so I can send you all these interviews. You're going to love them. But
sure, that'd be great.
But he was talking about, people would come up to him after shows. This is like around the late '60s, you know, around the time you guys had the beginnings of your band, and they'd say, "Oh man, you sounded great. You sounded just like." And then he'd just be like, "I wanted to slit my wrists when they said that," because it was like it was predicated on being yourself and having your own individual sound. And so that's always what I want to get to with younger cats as a broadcaster, is just being yourself. Because today, really, I mean, you use a click track, but you know what? Rick Marotta told me he'll be sitting in another room and he'll be hearing some drum beats, some drum patterns from another room, and he thinks that's got to be a machine. And he walks in and it's a human being playing machine parts. I mean, we're getting real close to the automatic man, Billy, and I want to move away from that. So how did you, in your mind, everybody begs and borrows and steals, but then how did you actually just get to the point where you developed your own individual style?
Well, like, for instance, David Hood, the legendary...
I've interviewed David. I love that guy, man. What a beautiful cat.
I worked with him a lot, and I was talking to him about how much Roger Hawkins influenced me, and so many things that I thought I sort of, I guess you'd call, stole from
Sure,
him.
absolutely.
David said, so he says to me, he says, no, you don't sound like him. You think you do, but you don't. You sound like yourself. And I took that as a pretty good compliment.
What did you glean from Hawkins? I mean, he's such a humble cat and has been so luminary on so many major hits. I mean, but what was it that stood out? Was it his? You fill it in. What did you love about his playing?
Well, he got a good drum sound. They got a good drum sound over there, and he played clean. In other words, it was not sloppy at all, and he knew how much to play. You know, that's part of how some of us get studio work. You just kind of know how much you don't overplay, but yet you don't underplay. You just try to, you know, we've all said this, and I'll say it again. You play the song, not the drums.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I've tried to do that. But I guess I sort of took to studio work immediately. And I guess that's sort of how I got my sound, by listening to guys like Roger and Al Jackson. And actually, I used to know Rick Marotta, but he's a clean, solid player.
Yeah, I know.
Steve Gadd, Steve Gadd.
I've interviewed Steve a couple times. Yeah, but yeah.
He could play a lot, but he plays what's supposed to be played for whatever song it is.
You know, that's what people say about Gadd too. It's like that dude doesn't underplay or overplay. I mean, it can be the most complex jazz or the simplest thing, but he's going to play what the song requires. I'm just curious about your.
Right.
I mean, were you a Art Blakey guy or a Joe Morello? I mean, what were your jazz influences, and who did you see on the jazz circuits? Because, I mean, the revelatory thing for me, Charlie Neville, the late great horn player, rest in peace. I did 2 interviews with him. Sonny Rollins,
right.
John Coltrane, Tootie Heath, the great drummer from Philly. They did not start out as beboppers. They started out on the R&B circuits. So the blues was right alongside.
Coltrane did that.
What's that?
Started out playing. John Coltrane.
He absolutely did.
Rhythm and blues.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I know Billy Stewart, being that you were just starting out, but I know that you must have seen some serious jazzers. Or who were you getting off on in the jazz scene?
Well, here's what happened to me. My aunt, I grew up in South Georgia. I had an aunt family that lived here in Atlanta, where I am now, and she joined the Columbia Record Club. I know you weren't around
yeah,
then,
I
but
love
you could
that,
get
dude. Yeah.
about several records for practically nothing if you bought a record once a month. So she wound up with about 4 jazz albums, and she said to me, I just don't exactly understand what this stuff is. And one of them was a Miles Davis live at the Black Hawk.
Oh boy! Oh man!
What else? J.J. Johnson, the trombone, one of his albums. It was about 4 jazz albums, and I just started listening to them, and at the very beginning, I remember going with particularly Miles, the Live at the Blackhawk, which was kind of hard bop at the time. I remember going, I don't know if I like this, but I know these guys are really, really good. And I kept listening to it, and I sort of like when we were kids, you know, if you didn't smoke cigarettes, you weren't cool. I didn't like cigarettes, but I made myself learn. It's just like with that Miles Davis record. I just kept listening to it. And finally, I started really liking it. And I'm a huge jazz nut to this day. And you take guys like Morello. Well, most every musician heard Take Five and stuff like that. And but to me, people like Art Blakey, Elvin Jones,
Yeah.
Max Roach, Tony Williams. I mean, that's to me my favorite music.
Can you talk about? It's so interesting. It's so brilliant because, like, I think if I was, I don't know what it would have been like to hear that stuff coming out at the time. That was definitely hard bop, the Blackhawk stuff. But you know, I mean, I listen to like. I actually do the same thing. Cigarettes or just listening to records where you put on a record, a jazz record, and like I'm listening to this Elmo Hope record, piano player, and Philly Joe Jones is playing drums on it, and it's the most ridiculous.
Really good.
I mean, can you just talk about how? I mean, part of it also, it may have been different in the studio scene in Macon, but I mean, one of the things I love about those guys, Kenny Clark or Max Roach, was that they were not using the bass drum necessarily as a timekeeper. They were using it for rebound.
Right.
And they were using the top of and I just wanted you to talk about how you incorporate that into what would, like, you know, Boyer and Talton, Cowboy. To me, there's a swing element to all that music which makes it burn. And I wanted to know how you learned how to maybe keep time on the top of the kit as opposed to just 4 on the floor, you know, a pulsating bass drum.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean by that. You know, you see old jazz videos, and about the only constant with the drummer is he's playing on the ride cymbal, and other stuff is thrown in and out, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, right.
I mean, it's improvising, and you're right, like, a lot of the stuff we do is based on the kick drum and the bass player. And, you know, another thing, mentioning David Hood, you know, a lot of these rhythm sections try to play every note, the bass and the bass drum at the same time. Well, I started learning that you can do that, but David Hood, when we do a session, we don't even talk about it, you know, this is the pattern. We just play. And it's not all every note is in sync, you know, identical. So, but yeah, you're right. Compared to all those jazz guys, the foot plays a pretty big role in the actual timekeeping.
It's true. I mean, you're saying that David doesn't. They don't. He plays like counterpoint to the bass drum. His notes will go.
Well, no. It's like you don't plan to play every note together.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. Exactly.
Everything my foot did, the bass player did rhythmically. I'm not talking about note-wise, and it's not always that way. So I learned that from those Muscle Shoals guys. You know, they're a little older than me, not much, but
yeah. I mean,
anyway.
dude, Billy Stewart. I mean, this is like a dream come true. I mean, the drummer for the band Cowboy. But like, I'm curious about, you know, the late great Gregg Allman. I mean, can you talk about like the idea of him potentially how you worked with him if he didn't have a bass player? Did he kick pedals or did he just play left hand bass?
No, he didn't use pedals.
He didn't use
that
pedals.
I ever saw. But well, here's what happened with Gregg. I went over to Macon with the band. It was called the Willie Band. That turned into Wet Willie.
Wet? You were in Wet Willie?
Well, it was the original version. It's a long story.
Okay, we don't have to get into that right now. Go ahead.
No, no, that's too long. Yeah. Anyway, so I wound up over there making some demos. A guy named Frank Friedman was involved, and he got us over there. And I was doing the demos for what turned into Wet Willie, and Johnny Sandlin was designated to produce us. So we cut a day or two, and Johnny called me in this back room and says, "Listen, would you like a job?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, I'm the studio drummer, A&R director, main producer, and engineer, and I can't do everything." And Phil Walden suggested we get another musician. So they offered me the job. I took it, and it went from there. Anyway, quickly, I got to know Gregg and Dwayne. I didn't know those guys. I'd heard of them, but I didn't know them. So Gregg and Dwayne would hang around the studio when they got home from the road. So Gregg and me started doodling around. He was fooling with these songs that turned into the Laid Back record. So I just play along with him. And there was just us two just quite a bit of the time.
Really?
So it just developed into I was sort of there for him. I mean, the rest of the band was not really developed yet. I hadn't decided what to do. But I mean, the song "Queen of Hearts," he was writing it, and he'd say, "Just keep playing, just keep playing." I was sort of like, his reference point, I guess you'd call it. And so I was there when he wrote that. And I'll tell you a quick funny story. So we go into the studio. We started out at Criteria Studios in Miami, and Barry Oakley. Gregg didn't know what to do when Dwayne died, about who to get. I felt for the guy. He was confused, but he had me, and Barry Oakley was down there, and two bass players. See, he just kind of didn't know. Robert Popwell, the other bass player.
Oh,
but
God,
anyway,
that guy,
so
this is sick. Yeah, go ahead.
So we get in the studio, right? And we're cutting Queen of Hearts, which is not a super easy song. It's got some odd time signatures. Well, I had already learned it from playing behind Gregg, just us two. So we cut the track, and everybody goes, "Damn, Stewart, you're quick, man." Thank you. I didn't tell them that I'd been playing it over and over with just me and Gregg. So, anyway.
Well, let's take a listen to what you're to this tune, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Sure.
All right.
Once I was glad, always happy, never sad, and every day seemed like Sunday. And all those things were slow, they never seemed to have no door. Somehow I never once got lonely. Oh yeah. See, the fact is more wasted so much time feeling guilty. As I watched her sit across the room, beautiful as the flowers bloom, vividly, just one day. No brother, you're gonna choke me back. Back and gone, yeah. I'm gonna swing the heart. Tell me not to stop. Just tell me where. Stop it.
Well, that was on the live. How similar is that? That was on the live album that you guys cut
Right.
with him. Was
Yeah,
that
that's the live version.
was that slower or about the same as the studio version?
I think it's similar. The thing I noticed is Buzz Featon, a great guitar player, played on the studio version. I believe that's Tommy Talton playing on that. Their styles are a little different, but tempo-wise,
Well, I can't believe because
I'd say
everybody.
they're
I just
very
want to let you
close.
know. I've interviewed Buzz. Buzz had a great story about showing up for that session. He wound up like flying in the night before. This is the laid back session, and
Right.
when he woke up in the morning, he had like tattoos all over his arm. He had a crazy
Oh, I
night
didn't
down.
know that.
Yeah, no, I'll send you the interview. You're gonna love it, dude. But anyway,
Yeah.
But I just want to be clear. You and Gregg locked in just organ or piano and drums on that song.
We did a lot. We started out with, like I said, he was writing. And what I meant was he didn't know what to do. His brother had tragically died,
Right.
Dwayne.
Oh, absolutely.
And it just threw the guy, and I felt for him because he was like, I've got these songs and I want to do a record. The brothers don't really want to do some of these tunes. You know, their style's a little different. This was more laid back. And so, you know, he was just feeling his way, and he's sort of shied away from getting a guitar player till sort of near the end of the development of laid back. And that's part of when Buzz Featon got it. I wish he had played on the whole record, but anyway, he did play on it, you know.
Yeah, J-Mo was playing congas on that record. I think that's
Yeah.
an amazing freaking
Well, you
album.
know, like I said, those guys were studio heads, sort of like J-Mo. They just come down to the studio, and if we were the studio band, we worked there every day. But guys like Dwayne and J-Mo, they say, "Hey man, can I play? Can I play on it?" So he just and Johnny Sandlin would just say, "Well, play along with Billy, do some percussion." So we did a lot of that, and we did two drummers, and like the Allman Brothers, Butch and J-Mo.
Yeah.
But J-Mo was always around and always contributed to our sessions when he was there. That's him on that slow Midnight Rider, playing the back of a guitar, acoustic guitar, sort of like a conga.
I was gonna say because like
On the
wow.
Midnight Rider, the slow version.
The like grinder switch, like you were the studio drummer for all the bands that would come into to Capricorn.
They had a drummer, Ricky Burnett, he was their drummer, and so I never worked with those guys, but I did with some other bands, but not with Grinder Switch.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, could you talk a little bit about, I'm always fascinated with this, too, because there's something about the records that were being recorded, and it's interesting because you talked about being, with the engineer, really before you took the drum chair, or you were doing both. Like, one thing that I find kind of interesting and frankly annoying about modern music is just every drum is mic'd now. And in the past, a lot of the old school producers might have an overhead, maybe 3 mics on the drum kit.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know about the record, because I mean the warmness and people get freaked out about leakage, and there was nothing wrong with a little bit of leakage in my opinion. And I just wanted you to
Oh, you're right.
I wanted you to talk a little bit about how you learned, what you thought about mic placement and the way to get that warm feeling, and what you learned from those being sort of, as an engineer, early on at Capricorn.
Well, I can tell you this: when I first started in Macon, it was Robert Popwell, me, Paul Hornsby, and a guitar player named Pete Carr. And it had been Johnny Sandlin on drums, but like I said earlier, they got me. And but what I noticed, because I had been doing studio work in Birmingham, Alabama, before I wound up in Macon.
Really?
What I noticed when we worked with Johnny, you got a drum set, one rack tom, one floor tom, kick, snare, and a hi-hat, ride cymbal, crash cymbal. That straight above the snare drum was a U47, Neumann U47.
Dig, yeah.
Now, the U87 is more known, but it was a U47 pointing straight down at the snare drum, and it was a Electro Voice RE20 on the kick drum, and that was it. I love the sound of that. It's so simple.
Oh, so do I, man. That sound is so. I mean, it just got the technology sort of. I guess you could have mic'd every drum, but I mean, for some reason, you just understood that the feel was the most important thing. And I think today we're caught up in this perfection thing. It has to somehow it has
True.
to. I don't, or this almost sterile thing. I mean, I also don't. That was which sessions were you on in Alabama? Because actually, there's no record of those sessions.
Well, what it was, I did a little in Muscle Shoals when I was really young. Just stuff.
Like demos
Johnny
and stuff?
Weicker.
Like demos?
Yeah, this guy named Johnny Weicker was trying to make a record, and I played on some stuff for him. But what it was when I said Birmingham, there was a studio called New London. The Matos family owned it. And they hired the beginning of Wet Willie. Like I said, it was called Willie Band.
Mm.
And they gave us this big house in Birmingham, and that house is still over there. And we stayed there for free, and they didn't pay us any money. But we got free rent, and I think they might have bought some groceries for us. In other words, we didn't have any money on us, none of us.
Right.
But we recorded every day. And it was sort of like being in the minor leagues baseball right before I went to Macon. I'm very lucky that it went down that way. In other words, I had been doing studio work every day in Birmingham, and then when I wound up in Macon, I was sort of experienced. And they used a lot of miking every drum, close miking everything. You know, these old records, Jake, people go, how do you get that sound? You know, the thing that people sort of have left out is ambient sound. Is a lot of the way those old records sound.
You're nailing it, exactly. Explain to the audience what that means, ambient sound.
Okay, well, you have a drum set, and you got the microphones about 2 or 3 inches, or very close to each instrument, tom-tom, whatever. Okay, ambient. So if you got some overheads and you're able to move them back, or even have a mic open in the room. I like that, and that's kind of extreme. But do you hear it at a little bit of a distance? And I'm thinking it might cause a little bit of a delay that's natural, not some effects box or something. So it's just hearing it farther away than closer up gives some of those old records the sound that everybody goes, well, I can't get that sound anymore. Well, it is the fact that the mics are farther away.
This is interesting because I used to be obsessed with analog versus digital, but it's not. It's how you mic and now you're talking about the distance of the mics as well. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, well, these sample loops that people use, I've been doing that since it came out. And some of them you go, I just don't know how you can get that. I can't get that. Well, a lot of it is that ambient. Some of those old sessions, they didn't have many microphones. Way back in the 50s and all. And everybody played at once. But there was not really much or any close miking. And that gives some of those big bands and jazz records the sound that they had.
I just want to be clear, though. You guys in the Little Willie band, you guys just woodshedded every day. There weren't artists coming in there, and you weren't on records. Were you pressing?
You mean in Birmingham?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was mixture, but it was like we did something. And one of the Matos' sons was an artist. He did an album. Well, I played on one of his albums. He had a deal with A&M Records, so we did a lot of stuff with him. But you're right, a lot of it was demos, and there was not many label records until I was involved in until I got over to make it.
Wow. Well,
it was a good experience.
Do you have? I mean, I just want to make sure. Do you have the records that you recorded from Birmingham?
I have at least one.
Well, we're going to have to listen. I just wanted to ask you, could we set up a time later on to do part 2? I would love to do part 2 with you. I got another guest coming on at the top of the hour here.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
Certainly.
All right. So I'll give you a call later. Yeah.
Would that be today?
No, it won't be today. I mean, but I want to also get your.
I gotta go play.
Oh yeah, go play. But I'm just saying, I want to be able to send you a copy of this interview, and I also want to send you a bunch of my other interviews so you can listen to them as well, and we can set up a time to do part 2.
That'd be great. Just let me know. We'll get it done for you.
Much love, Billy Stewart. Thanks for taking the time, man.
Nice talking to you, Jay.
All right, dude. Have a good day.
Take care.
Later. Just another whistle stop. Billy Stewart, legendary drummer with the Cowboy Band, and also Gregg Allman, and as we just heard, was in the Little Willie Band prior to Wet Willie. We'll be back with Sam Blasucci of Apache after this.